A high-protein keto meal shake that fits in these two shakers is what I'm trying to make. What we need: 2 packs of vegetables, tomato sauce, a scale, a water heater, because we actually want to cook eggs, the eggs, a smoothie mixer, spices, oil and vinegar. So let's first of all weigh the vegetables. So we switch to grams. Then take a bowl and ideally measure 100 grams. This is 1 kilogram. This means if I buy 2 of these in a given week, because the whole thing should be divisible into 7 days, then I get 100 grams per package per week. That was 150 grams. And this is 100 grams. So now let's also take 100 grams from the others. 220, 218, 210, 200. 200 grams of vegetables is actually not that much. What I tried to do in the past, in a previous video, I tried to turn my normal salad into this shake. Now I switched the recipe a little bit up. Why? Because I realized, as also stated in one of the recent videos, that I had way too little protein, actually only like 50 grams and way more carbs than protein. So what I want to do is I want to have a keto meal shake because that keeps my brain power up throughout the day. So therefore, let's now take all of these. The idea is also to not cook them. Of course, I have to cook the eggs. I mean, you don't really need to cook the eggs, but if you don't cook the eggs, the bioavailability of the different nutrients in the eggs is not given, is basically half. So out of the protein you would otherwise have in the eggs, you get only half of it. So if an egg, I don't know how much an egg exactly has, maybe 6 grams of protein, maybe a little bit more, then you get only half of the grams of protein that actually can be absorbed. So for this reason, I think I still need the water heater in order to boil the eggs. I figured also out that it makes sense to, because this whole thing should also be very quick. The whole idea is also to basically automate my meals. Not fully automate, obviously, because there is not an automation service that fully is also so much customizable, because I still want to have some control over this, even though ideally in a near-term future I would not have control over this, therefore also not interfere with an ideal recipe that would ideally consist of all the nutrients I need at a given point in time. So now I try to basically minimize all the different components. Obviously it should not cost as much. Ideally it should also be vegan in terms of environment, but I think this is not really possible, at least not due to, it's not due to anything, it's just within the given constraints I have, given financial constraints and given also constraints of bioavailability. So I don't want to have a lot of stuff that is not bioavailable in there. Example, if you take the protein out of lentils, then you can only absorb about half of it. This is called bioavailability. This means you would have to eat otherwise twice the amount of protein in order to get the same amount of protein compared to a protein source that has the bioavailability of basically 1, so standardized. So now we take these. Of course I could also potentially turn this into a soup later on, but the whole idea is to make it into something that I can drink, basically. Of course, if you drink nutrients, there is also the problem that the absorption time is much slower, not slower, but quicker. Therefore, you can basically not absorb as much. But for the purpose of still trying to make this shake, I figured out a reality. So basically, I'm trying to make a meal replacement shake, but with more healthy nutrients. And because of the protein problem, I figured I do have to buy a protein powder, because otherwise I just cannot get to a decent protein size. So let's first of all try this. Let's try if this is actually something I could turn into liquid, or if this is to basically, of course it is still frozen, but the idea is, or the question is, whether this can already turn into something that is liquid. What I also could do, since I already have this here, and I still need to cook the eggs. That's something I just see as a given. Of course, I could also increase the protein powder and get rid of the eggs, therefore making this whole shake vegan. But at least right now, that's not something I do want to do, because the eggs are just good foods, I guess. And I do not try to be vegan at all costs. I mean, it is nice whenever it happens, if I have a good recipe basically, or I figured out a good recipe. But if it doesn't happen, I'm also not. I mean, somewhere you have to, I think, make a compromise. So therefore, also recently I also made a video about protein and about meat basically, and I even figured I might try meat again in order to see how increased good protein, basically a good protein source, would change things regarding my mind, and also regarding my nutrition, and also regarding my recovery and so on. So now this is basically what it looks like, and if you now put this on heat, what this turns out to be is kind of a liquid protein shake that is made out of eggs. You could potentially even stir it up a little bit, and what you also can do is you can make it taste by adding soup spice. Not make it taste, but you can have, oh, this was a lot of soup spice. Potentially get it out of there, because otherwise it will not taste very nice. Now again, if I already have this in here, and I already cooked the eggs, I might as well just throw these in there, and then I just stir up the whole soup, or grind the whole soup, or blend the whole soup. I think this would also be a possibility. Yeah, but let's try it first to mix these without heating them up, and let's see how it goes. So without any additional liquid, it doesn't go too well, even though, of course, the vegetables are largely based on liquid. I still think I will now throw this into the water heater, because then I can test this better. Also, I am thinking about maybe getting a blender, a professional blender, and not just a smoothie blender, because this would actually enable me to potentially also alter the recipe in the near-term future. Of course, there are also these cooking machines where you can potentially also cook the thing in there, but then these are very expensive, they're also very big, and I do also want to keep things small, because potentially moving again, potentially also being able to just be a little bit more flexible and to not have to carry around so much stuff. And also, of course, a kitchen machine costs a lot. So now, let's see how that goes. In terms of the protein powder, I went for a bulk protein powder. So this is a brand, and they offer basically a blend of different proteins. So there is pea protein in there, and I think this is very nice because it actually brings together these different components and therefore basically increases the food variety. Because one of the main problems of making something like this daily shake, you would then daily drink, is food variety. Food variety impacts blood microbiome, not blood, but gut microbiome, for example. And therefore, you actually want to have a good food variety. And this seems to be a good marker. So now, a good marker for overall health is how healthy your gut microbiome actually is. So therefore, what I went for, so a few days back, or a few weeks even, I realized I potentially am on the very low end of protein. In the past, I said 0.8 grams of protein for my 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is the thing I am using. So there were different numbers out there in the past, and it seemed that you could get away with less protein. What I didn't really realize to the full extent at which I may have realized it in the last few days, is that the protein I actually ate was mostly vegan protein or vegetarian protein, which means the bioavailability of this protein compared to something like an egg or compared to something like meat is much lower. So therefore, I would actually have to eat more. So therefore, the 0.8 grams of protein are not necessarily the dietary protein, but this is the actual amount of protein you then should get into your system. But if there is a number that is basically that decreases all of this, let's go back to the lentils, about 50% of the protein you cannot use. So therefore, you need to eat more protein. If you are still vegan, of course you could eat less protein than, or eat the same amount of protein that is recommended if you then are meat-based, or not meat-based, but still eat meat, or are vegetarian and eat eggs and things like these. But if, for example, I wanted to cover my protein with the eggs, then I would have to eat 10 or more eggs a given day. And this is not something, at least currently, I think that is necessary. So therefore, or it would be necessary, because otherwise, here's the problem. I wanted to cover my protein needs with whole foods in the past. This whole foods also included, or these whole foods also included nuts, for example. Now here's the problem. With every gram of protein, there also comes a certain amount of carbohydrates and a certain amount of fats. Now, given I only have a total amount of calories I can consume, I cannot consume enough protein with the given macronutrient ratio I had. And I realized that if I don't excessively eat only eggs, for example, I couldn't cover my protein needs that I would actually need if I wanted to go to 1 gram of protein per kilogram, or even 2 grams of protein per kilogram. And I couldn't, of course, I also have to mention, I also basically want to avoid dairies. So, of course, you could get proteins specifically from cottage cheese, for example, or also from curd, but also these would be very selected protein sources and not the general approach to just getting your protein from your nutrition. I would actually have to eat 2 packages of curd a day, no, 2 packages of cottage cheese, or 1 total pack of curd, which is half a kilogram, and together with the eggs to even cover the protein needs. The whole problem with the nuts is that they are very high in fat and they also come with carbohydrates. So therefore, whenever you eat nuts, your insulin actually spikes to a certain extent, and they're also very nutrient dense, not very nutrient dense. So they're actually very calorie dense because of the fat that is in there. So the problem is, if, for example, you ate 200 grams of peanuts and then you had a considerably higher or a reasonable amount of protein. The problem is, if you eat 200 grams of peanuts, this results in about 1.4k calories, so 1,400 calories. And this is already more than half of your daily meal, of your daily calories at least. This now means, if you want to get higher in protein, you just don't have a protein lever if you have a completely vegan diet. Now, if you have a completely vegan whole food diet, so therefore, what you can add is a protein powder. But this is not something I wanted to add. I wanted to also be the nutrition to be very easy and to just be purchasable at the local grocery store, which is now not possible anymore, because if I'm depending on a additional source of protein, which is basically the isolated protein of whole foods, then I am also dependent on this. And so what I realized is that unless I relied specifically on dairies again, unless I ate only eggs, then I would have to add additional protein that is basically isolated protein, because otherwise this protein would only come with a certain amount of carbs. That's sad. Not that sad, but all of this, again, only falls under the umbrella of me, or is only because of the objective of me trying to also do a keto diet. And therefore I cannot exceed 50 grams of carbohydrates. If you can exceed 50 grams of carbohydrates, you still have the problem that you cannot really get your protein from the normal whole food vegan sources, because there is just not something that scales up with, you just don't have a protein lever. If you want to eat 50 grams of protein more, I mean, of course, so I recently saw a video from someone who said okay, if you just only ate 2,000 calories of this, then you would have this much protein. And for example, only lentils, and he said I think, around 120 grams of lentil protein. That is nice, but it's only one. And if you don't combine the different protein sources together, the bioavailability stays the same. If you instead, for example, combine eggs with something else, then the bioavailability overall increases. Because actually, what happens is that the different amino acids that you actually need, one is always the lowest, and the one that is lowest basically inhibits the other protein from actually being built, at least to the extent at which it is the lowest. So therefore there is always one thing that prevents the whole thing from basically being turned into something, because you still need these different amino acids, and if one is only like 50% of the others, then this might turn out to be a potential problem, because then you cannot use the others, and the others are still, or just excess amino acids, you could say. For this reason, I considered going back to meat, or at least trying it, in order to basically have a protein lever again. A lever I could pull to increase the amount of dietary protein I eat in a given day. Because protein has, compared to fat at least, less calories. This means 4 calories per gram. The same is true for carbs, 4 calories per gram, whereas fat has 9 calories per gram. And the whole problem with the peanuts is additionally simplified like this. If I eat once a day and I eat 200 grams of peanuts, then I build up fat every single day. And this happened for the last, 2 years, since I tried introducing not nuts into my diet. So what happened is that the combination of the carbs with the fats, and also given that protein was just very little, meant that if my body actually needed a given amount of protein, let's say 120 grams of bioavailable protein, which in terms of not supplementing, but supplying this protein with vegan, so basically plant-based foods, plus eggs, would mean that I have to eat more than 120 grams of protein, because the protein that is, for example, in lentils is not actual bioavailable protein. So therefore we have to basically calculate the actual bioavailable protein in theory. So what I think could have caused some overeating is the fact that if I, for example, worked out yesterday and I also work out today and I just don't recover anymore. It's not that I just don't recover anymore, but that often happened, I guess. So I just was sore all the time. I didn't want to really move anymore. I think this could be a potential adaptation mechanism from the body, basically. So think of the body now, or imagine you are the body, and you need maybe 120 grams of protein, but I only give you 60 grams of protein, not potentially even 60 grams of protein, because the 60 grams of protein I usually ate are 60 to 90 grams. Usually I try to aim at 90, but that didn't always work out, and also when trying to then go vegan, it got lower to even 60 grams of protein, which is ridiculously low. I know this. But if you now need 120 grams of protein, what would you as the body make me do? Potentially eat as much of the food that is available until the protein is met. This could mean that even if I wanted to eat only 100 grams of peanuts, that actually was the amount I wanted to eat, even though I often also experimented with eating 200 grams or 300 grams of nuts in a given day, even though that then exceeded again the 2,000 calorie goal or 2.5 calorie goal. I just wanted to experiment with the different effects of this. But then you as the body would tell me to eat more until the protein is met. So similar to the amino acids, if there is something in there that limits basically what you can do with the food, then it would make sense to get more of the food to use all of the food. And otherwise, the rest is just unnecessary and it's just excess. This means if I then eat, let's say 3.5 calories, 1,000 calories, then of course this is also kilocalories. So I'm actually using the unit double. So in reality it would be kilo mega giga. So it would be mega calories actually. But what this would mean is that you as the body would force me to eat more food until my protein is met. If the protein is the thing that is the constraint basically, then because there is probably not a real requirement for more fat anymore, and also not for more carbohydrates, since you actually don't really need carbohydrates. Now, so carbohydrates can be made out of fat, they can be made out of protein. Protein cannot be made out of fat, protein cannot be made out of carbohydrates, fat also cannot, at least the essential fats. Of course, fat that is stored as the fat in our body can be made out of protein and carbohydrates, but the essential fats, the fats you actually cannot produce on your own, are of course not reproducible, and therefore you can also not produce these fats out of carbohydrates or protein. So what you actually need is the essential fats and the essential proteins, which are called amino acids. Now, I think they are even called essential amino acids. Now, if I still want to have my more or less normal diet, then I need to have a protein lever. But I cannot get a protein lever unless I increase the meat, because meat is actually mostly protein. And it's ridiculous. Meat is basically a protein powder in meat form, if you think about it like this. Or I would have to buy protein powder. And that's what I did. Of course, another concept would also be to just buy a keto oat meal shake. That would also be nice, but I just didn't find anything that was reasonably priced. I tried Huel and also the keto hack that was available with Huel. It is just that the carbohydrates were way too high, and I noticed this in my mental sharpness. So now I ordered from Bulk Powders a protein powder that is a blend out of different proteins, like flaxseed, like pumpkin seed, like pea protein, and therefore I have a variety of foods, at least within the protein, and I would add this protein powder to vegetables. When it comes to vegetables, I also again and again had to realize that first of all, so it just makes more sense in terms of keeping the cost, the time cost mostly, for preparing food down, to get food already kind of prepared. But also it should be not too prepared, I guess, because then it is convenience food, and then it also is probably tastes a little bit better, and it again has maybe sugar in it, and therefore it is not something you should pursue potentially. So getting frozen vegetables is therefore a kind of a trick, because these two frozen vegetables are also mixes, similar to the nut mixes I had in the past, which were basically different nuts together in one bag. The benefit is that you get a bigger food variety within the same format. If you then only buy one nut, for example, 200 grams, then you only have the one nut. This means you also have to keep a store or keep track of all the different things you have in your kitchen. So now, here's the idea. This actually, I wanted just to simplify it even more. So I get these 2 bags of frozen vegetables, and I can also vary these vegetables over time, maybe adding spinach, for example, which also comes in a 1 kilogram bag. So the vegetables are basically, the fresh vegetables are replaced by the frozen vegetables entirely. This also allows me to just see everything in one place. So I don't have to have like a huge bag of groceries with all the different vegetables. In terms of the tomatoes, the idea is to replace them with tomato sauce. Of course, fresh tomatoes would be potentially better, but fresh vegetables are something you have to still wash. These things are already prepared, these foods are already prepared, so therefore I don't have to wash them. So it would be vegetables, frozen vegetables, then also tomato sauce, because I think I like tomato sauce, and this would give the whole thing a little bit of taste. And then oils, spices, and vinegar. When it comes to vinegar, I am using a teaspoon, not a teaspoon, but a tablespoon of normal vinegar, and then a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, which turns the whole thing already pretty sour. So maybe I will reduce this. I already did this previous iteration of this shake, and the taste was nice, I have to admit, but maybe it would have been potentially nicer if there was a little bit of less. It was a little bit too hot and spicy. Not too hot, but much more too spicy actually. And then I add all these other not vegetables, but first of all, spices. The different spices I usually add is something I already told you probably. Maybe I'll post a screenshot of my fitness pal at any point in time, maybe on Instagram. And additionally, I have 4 different oils. Currently, I previously only had 3, which is flaxseed oil, pumpkin seed oil, olive oil, and sunflower oil. Why the sunflower oil? Again, because too much of olive oil is something I don't really like in terms of the taste. Of course, olive oil is potentially healthier, but I thought if I would also switch the oil source to something that is, again, multifaceted, and in total 50 milliliters, then this would result in 2K calories. And in terms of how much of the bulk powder I would add, it's 7 scoops, I think. 1 scoop is 35 grams, and which contains 20 grams of protein. So therefore, I would total, with also adding the 5 eggs, I would total almost exactly 2K calories. Also, given that I have fish oil supplements, which have about 100 calories, and also a multivitamin. I actually switched the multivitamin out to a multivitamin and multi-mineral, because if you think about what a meal replacement actually is, then it is basically the macronutrients plus the micronutrients. And the micronutrients are usually the vitamins and the minerals. And I figured, why not just replace basically the food replacement with something I can adjust myself, and with also fresh foods from the supermarket, and just get the bulk powder instead of relying on Hure. Of course, I would prefer ideally if I got my whole food in powder form delivered, but then again, you would miss out on the potential benefits of fresh vegetables, I guess. Also, I just wouldn't feel or think that this makes too much sense in the long term to get just rid of all the vegetables. Yeah, that's about it. So this is how the soup now looks. And it actually still isn't cooked yet, because I experimented a little bit with the water heater, and now there are things that are stuck on the bottom plate, which means it automatically shuts down all the time. What I can do in the meanwhile is add the oils and spices. So maybe, because this doesn't open all the time, I just add it to a bowl. Oh, I'm still filming. So, 1 tablespoon of pumpkin seed oil. This also tastes very nice. Flaxseed oil. Olive oil. Also about a tablespoon. Sunflower oil. Normal vinegar without sugar. Apple cider vinegar. A little bit of salt. Of course, this is then for the entire mix, including the powder I get from bulk, but I don't know yet how much this will be. Maybe also a little bit of pepper, probably a tablespoon in total. Paprika or bell pepper spice. 100 milliliter of tomato sauce, and this whole thing is actually about 700 milliliters, which is very convenient because the week has 7 days. Italian spices, including oregano and things like these. Caraway, also tablespoon, no, teaspoon. Cumin, cinnamon, curry, which also includes turmeric, but in a smaller proportion. And also in the new multivitamin I get, there will be about, I think, 50 milligrams of turmeric in there. And I will add a few that are not really that beneficial, which is this one and maybe also potentially a little bit of garlic. If I do it for the whole week, the spice mix for the whole week again, I will return to bigger bowls. And also I have a few spice mixes. This one is an Indian, and I will just add a little bit. Just not officially, just me tinkering around with the recipe. I will now add all of this, maybe stir it before. Actually looks quite yummy. Also, I don't have cacao powder right now, but this is also an ingredient since it also seems to be quite beneficial in terms of health. Now, it still is not cooked enough, but for the sake of showing you all the way, this is partially at least what it looks like. The egg at least. Of course, it could be more, and also potentially I could use a bowl. It could be more cooked, that's what I'm trying to say. And obviously you're not seeing it, but you're seeing it kind of here. And also I added a little bit too much water, which now results in the whole thing being way too much. So therefore, we also have to keep in mind that there is still all the bulk powder that comes to this. It obviously would be way easier if I didn't cook the vegetables and I would just not use eggs, because then I wouldn't have to cook them. And also this creates a lot of time requirement on a weekly basis. So let's now try to see what this looks like when it's shaken. So this is what it looks like if I take a look at the consistency, which obviously is now more liquid because I just am missing the protein powder. So now it's a more of a liquid shake. You could alter the color. So the last time I had a lot of spinach in there, and this meant that it was actually green, but I don't know actually why, maybe because of the curry. It is mostly yellowish. So now the idea is to have these in these glasses. Of course, the whole liquid will extend once I freeze the whole thing. But the whole idea is to have 7 of these in my small freezer with the vegetables basically, and then the other half would be a glass just with the powder. This means that for the entire week I would only have to freeze the vegetables and they stay fresh, and the powder is already something that doesn't need to be frozen. And then in a given day, ideally, at least that's what I'm currently working with, I could then mix these two. So basically I would take these glasses and mix them into each other. Or mix them again with the smoothie mixer. I actually haven't quite figured this out. The whole problem is that I only can fit 7 of these glasses into my small freezer department. And if I then want to have them on the go, I would put them or fill them into here. But it seems that I could make this work again, at least in terms of the volume. And this is 600 milliliters and these are also about 600 milliliters. So of course I cannot fill it to the brim because of the freezing part, and I also still have something left in here. So that's also something to keep in mind, but I also added way too much water. Of course, leaving out the part where I cook the whole food in the water boiler is kind of the thing that is kind of making this operation into a way longer operation than it otherwise could be. The reason I cannot show you the protein powder yet is because it just didn't arrive yet. It should already have arrived a few days back, but it didn't. So therefore this is what it looks like. Of course then with more protein powder in it and a second glass with this. In terms of taste, I just tasted it and it actually tastes quite nice. This would then total in vegetarian nutrition, that is about 200 grams of protein. So that's way more than before. Even more than 3 times the amount of protein than before. It would also be around the 50 grams of carbs mark, but since I usually eat in the evening, this is not that big of a deal. But if I then eat in the day or during the day, my mind is usually slightly impaired from eating carbs. I also have a little bit of food variety, of course not on a day-to-day basis, but at least the food I eat ideally on a day-to-day basis, at least within the shake, which would then be the default. Of course, I still can get additional food or other food or cook food, because I think this way it's much easier to do something like this. Compared to if you say, oh, for the rest of my life I want to drink the shake, then this might create some kind of hopelessness, which is very easily to be avoided by just not stating that you want to eat this for the rest of your life.